So, there's been a lot of news lately about censorship. First, Visa and MasterCard have been trying to restrict payments for Steam games, and the reasoning they've given is to prevent kids from purchasing porn games. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna skip all of the YouTube self censorship for this video because I can only say corn so many times before I can't ask you to take me seriously. If this video gets taken down, you know where to find me on Rumble. Now, almost everyone that I personally know who heard about this thought it was complete bunk. Because we know that they're not going to stop at going after porn games, they're going to flex their payment muscles on any game that they don't want you to be able to pay for. And it's only a matter of time before the AAA industry starts working a deal with your credit card company to make sure that certain competing games are labeled porn. Not because they actually are, but because they're hurting the profits of big companies that have lost touch with their actual market. Now you have politicians in England trying to crack down on the internet, and a similar bill is being put forward in the United States. And in both cases, the alleged reason is to protect children from adult material on the internet. People keep comparing this to an anime from 2015 called Shimonetta, which is a worthwhile watch if you haven't seen it. However, the comparisons between a world without dirty jokes and the world these politicians are trying to build start to fall flat when you realize that the government in Shimonetta was actually trying to protect children, in their own twisted way. And absolutely nobody who is talking about these censorship propositions believes that to be the case with the politicians in real life. But the key problem here is nobody who is talking about these things believes that the government cares about kids. There's a whole lot of normies out there who are just stirring the Kool-Aid and believing whatever they're told. And there's an old question in politics. Would you oppose everything that Hitler proposed? Even if his proposition was to build the Autobahn? Most people would say that the reasonable thing to do would be to consider each potential law regardless of who it came from, as even a stopped clock can be right twice a day. The problem is that politicians have figured out a long time ago how to dress up the tyrannical bills they want to pass and make them sound as good as possible. And one way to do that is to make it sound like they care about children. And porn is the ultimate Trojan horse. Everybody I've heard talking about these new censorship bills, how governments are going to try and make you give your ID in order to access the internet, how it's going to let the government track everything you do online, and how if you're not using a VPN the year of our Lord 2025, I don't know what rock you've been living under, you sweet, sweet innocent child, but you're toast. But everyone I've heard talking about this, from Asmongold to Rev Says Desu to Romanian TV to Moist Critical to even Nuxtaku, they all say the same thing. Porn is the ultimate Trojan horse because no one would defend porn. Well, guess what? I will. And if you bear with me, I will go through the arguments you should bring up with anyone in your life who thinks censorship is okay as long as it's banning porn. The first problem is, what are we calling porn? What's your definition of porn? As a lawyer, whenever I hear anyone trying to get something banned, and they can't adequately define it, all of the alarm bells in my brain go off. Everyone always thinks that whatever common definition of porn we use today will be fine, but time and time again, those of us who had to pore over legal cases in order to get through law school know that that's not how it works. That's never how it works. Tyranny does not come from iron law. If I somehow made it a law that public urination would get the death penalty, that's not tyranny because you automatically know what you need to not do to avoid running afoul of the law. Tyranny comes from one of two places. It either comes from overcriminalization, where the government makes so many things illegal that you cannot live your life without breaking the law, so you're just waiting for the government to decide if and when to punish you for things that you could not reasonably avoid doing. And the other place is when the law is deliberately written in such a soft, flexible manner that you can't really tell when you're in compliance or not. And we'll be talking about both of these types of tyranny, but for now, let's just focus on the type where the law is deliberately ambiguous. Porn today is largely defined as sexually explicit videos, photographs, writings, or the like, produced to elicit sexual arousal. It can also be defined as television shows, articles, photographs, etc., thought to cater to an excessive, irresistible desire for or interest in something. That second definition should already be setting off some alarm bells in your head, but the first definition has its own problems. What are we calling sexually explicit? Is it anything suggestive? Is it anything harmful to minors? What are we considering harmful to minors? What about Cocomelon? What about all of the slop on YouTube Kids that's been proven to ruin their brains? Is Cocomelon porn? What about pictures of feet? There's a lot of people out there who are really into feet. How many episodes of Nickelodeon shows contain teenage girls' feet because of the perverts behind the scenes? Are photographs of feet considered porn? Someone out there is getting off to them. And is that the standard? If someone finds a thing arousing, it suddenly becomes porn and has to be taken away from the rest of us? Do women need to be wearing burqas from head to toe from now on? It might sound like I'm being ridiculous, but remember what I said about overcriminalization. This is how it starts. And who gets to decide? The answer, historically, has always been the last group of people you would ever want to have that kind of power. Because the only people who want the job of deciding what you can have are the control freaks who want to take it away from you. It's not going to be people who actually care about children. Those people are too busy raising their own kids into proper adults to worry about whether or not you can watch big titty anime women. See, the people who actually care about children aren't giving them iPads as an electronic babysitter, so they're too busy being actual parents to be running for public office so that they can parent you. No, it's Karens and control freaks who seek out that kind of power. And speaking of Karens, let's talk about romance novels for a moment. Are romance novels porn? Most people today seem to think that they aren't, even though they arguably could be crammed into the definitions we just went over. For some reason, romance novels have more or less been sanctioned by the public at large, even though this kind of smut seems to have the exact same impact on women that visual porn has on men. You know the stereotype of the guy who goons too much to spicy material and is addicted to anime women with massive honkers and skimpy outfits, and he has ridiculously unrealistic expectations of how women should act in real life? Well, women who read too much smut romance are the same. The reason we have a growing subgenre of monster romance novels is because the target audience of things like 50 Shades needs to keep escalating to keep chasing that high. A billionaire who has a sex dungeon just isn't novel anymore. Now it's gotta be a billionaire werewolf. Why isn't this considered porn? It seems to have the same effect. People have been saying for years that women's standards for dating today are too high, and they blame dating apps, but what if that's not the only reason? Do you think that there are any men who, thanks to porn obsession, have a hard time finding real women attractive? Do you think maybe, just maybe, the same rule applies in the other direction? I have heard people try to argue that all anime is porn, including things like Psycho Pass and Shimonetta. And I'm increasingly starting to think that they want shows like Psycho Pass banned because they're worried that people who watch them will figure out what these loonies in government are up to. And why should only anime be banned? What, because there's attractive women in anime? There are attractive women in Western cartoons, too. Not as many today, but we used to have characters like Raven and Starfire. We still have various women in adult comedies like Family Guy and American Dad. And of course, there's still plenty of attractive-looking men in Western TV. You think we haven't noticed that? Women in TV and video games keep getting uglier, but the men stay attractive? Ladies, let me tell you a little secret about the history of law. Every weapon you make to take other people's things that they enjoy away eventually gets used on you. It's only a matter of time. And just so we're clear, I am fully aware that pornography addiction is bad. But it's bad in large part for the same reasons that alcohol addiction is bad. All addiction is bad. Should we ban alcohol? Oh, wait, we tried that. How'd that go again? Did it work? Or did we just end up with organized crime that we haven't been able to get rid of ever since? This is why definitions for things are so important. I understand that genuine pornography is harmful, but so is almost everything. We now know that alcohol is physically bad for you in any amount. Why aren't we banning everything that's unhealthy? The phrase, "I know it when I see it," just isn't good enough. First, because you're not supposed to be looking, and second, because you either don't know what should or shouldn't be considered porn, or you're just being dishonest. Next, I want to talk about porn from a religious standpoint. Because a lot of people in America are religious in some way or another, and they'll tell you that porn is different from alcohol because porn in and of itself is a sin. To which I say, where in the Bible does it say that? Well, the word porn didn't exist back then, just like the internet didn't exist back then either. Jesus didn't warn us that in 2,000 years there'd be a thing called the World Wide Web. There wouldn't be enough paper in the world for the Bible to include every detail of things to come. Fair enough. But just because the word hadn't been invented yet doesn't mean that the concept wasn't around. In ancient Rome, they had nude paintings. They had nude sculptures. They had theatrical plays where you could actually watch people do the deed, at least in some capacity. The actual act itself might be behind a curtain or a sheet, but it's not like you couldn't still hear it. Why is it never brought up? The only verse I've ever found that is used to justify banning pornography is Matthew 5, verse 28, which says that anyone who looks wistfully at a woman is guilty of adultery. Sounds open and shut, right? But take this into context. In this chapter, Jesus is explaining to his disciples that everyone is guilty in some way. No one is innocent. He's not telling people that they need to wrap every attractive woman in a blanket and make sure she wears closed-toed shoes to keep the feet people from getting aroused. And in the very next verse, Jesus says that if your eye causes you to sin, cut it out and throw it away. Most people have interpreted this to mean things like, if your TV causes you to sin, turn it off and do something else or get rid of it. You don't actually have to gouge out your eye, because your eye isn't really the problem. You know what the Bible flat out doesn't say? It doesn't give you permission to cut someone else's eye out if it causes them to sin. When was the last time you heard someone condemning porn where they defined porn to include something that they liked? Ever notice how it's never people who enjoy anime calling for it to be banned? Or complaining about video games somehow being pornography? No, it's always ban porn, where porn is defined as the things that I don't like, and leave an exception for the things that I do like. I'm gonna bring up the romance novel thing again. Now, one could argue that this verse is saying that porn is bad, but one could just as easily argue that the American Eagle ads with Sydney Sweeney are now porn because someone is looking at her wistfully. Actually, there's probably someone trying to get those ads labeled as porn right now, so that might be a bad example. Does this mean guys can go ahead and do it? I'll be honest, I don't know. But that's the thing. I don't know. And because I don't know the answer, I am not going to condemn everyone who uses porn who doesn't take it to the level of addiction. I am certainly not going to twist the Bible for my own purpose and go after everything that I don't like by labeling it porn. You know what else Jesus said? Take the plank of wood out of your own eye before you help your neighbor with the speck of dust in his. Jesus ate with prostitutes. He made a tax collector one of his apostles. He forgave adulterers and sinners of all kinds. But there was one group of people that Jesus could never get along with, no matter how hard he tried. Hypocrites. Oh, and before I forget, if there are any Jewish people watching this, I'm sorry, you've got nothing. I couldn't find anything in the Old Testament to support banning half the things people are calling porn these days. It was all in the Gospels. Either Moses liked his big titty anime women, or it just wasn't important enough to mention. Finally, let's talk about the root cause of pornography addiction. This is kind of the elephant in the narthex for Christians, because Jesus had some choice words for Pharisees who would wag the finger at people for their sin, but wouldn't lift a finger to help them deal with the root cause of their sin. If you truly believe that porn is a sin, you should, by all accounts, be doing whatever is in your power to help people get out of whatever problem is in their life causing them to turn to porn. Proverbs 3 verse 27. Do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it's in your power to help them. That's a bit of a weird verse when you consider that the Bible tells us that we deserve nothing, but a common interpretation is that in this case, deserve means people seeking help to be better and do better, but can't because of a problem in their lives they can't seem to fix by themselves. Which means, yes, there actually is a commandment in the Bible to help people who are trying to climb out of things like addiction, and help them deal with the source of that addiction. Why is all this a problem for so many Christians? Well, because porn addiction seems to primarily come from two major problems: feeling like your life has no purpose or meaning, and needing an outlet for an unfulfilled sex life. There are other reasons, but basically, a lot of pornography addiction would go away overnight if we solved the loneliness epidemic, which no one wants to do. Let's take a quick step back and look at how Christians have tackled this subject. First, we cobbled together a sin of porn that isn't really supported by the scripture. Then we expanded on that definition to include more and more things that have nothing to do with the one verse that we cling to back up this crusade. And then, when people start getting addicted to porn, and it actually manifests in a way that is negatively impacting their physical and mental health, the church flat out refuses to address the source of the addiction. If I just described you, you are not acting like Christ. You are not even acting like one of Christ's disciples. You are acting like the Pharisees Christ explicitly chewed out for driving people further away from him and deeper into sin. I would rather be a porn-addicted gooner who struggles with his addiction than be the hypocrite who drives people away from Christ. Because it wasn't the gooner whom Jesus said would be better off if they had a millstone tied around their neck and then thrown into the sea. By the way, I just want to throw this out there, the government will not ban porn, even if it does pass these draconian bills. Because if it did, we'd have all these lonely, depressed, disillusioned men who are all fighting aged. I will repeat, fighting aged. Do you know what has historically happened to civilizations that had an excess of fighting aged men who could not find wives or girlfriends? Usually, they grabbed the nearest blunt object and smashed everything that wasn't 10 feet off the ground. The only exception to this seems to be when they had some means of escapism. It's actually one of the reasons why China became so vulnerable to opium addiction, and led to the Opium Wars. And part of the reason why the British were able to walk all over the Chinese military. because a lot of their fighting age men were opium addicts. Might have had something to do with the fact that their emperor kept rounding up every attractive woman in all of China and adding them as concubines to his harem. Just a thought. And that brings me to another reason why banning porn is a bad idea. Cutting an addict off their drug doesn't cure the addiction. It usually results in them seeking out something else, and you don't know what that new drug is going to be. And the other possibility is that all of the disenfranchised men out there who get woken up from the bread and circuses of porn decide that the game of life has been rigged, so they're going to flip the table. I'm not saying they should, I'm saying they might. And now, let's talk about today's featured video game. Machine Mind is a giant spinner box. If you don't know what that means, it's just enough of a game to keep you playing, but there is no actual story, just the hint of one that's never fulfilled. There's a feeling of progress that isn't really there. Look, there is something I find genuinely toxic about games like this. There is no nuance, there is no effort at good writing, or to make a game that actually requires any kind of strategy. It's just enough of a game to distract you from the fact that it doesn't have anything good about it. And no, distraction is not the same thing as entertainment. Do I need to do a video about that someday? Maybe. Maybe one day. Alright, that's all I'm going to do for today. Thank you all. Check out my books on Amazon, hit that like and subscribe button, and goodbye.